The Tsar Bomb 2 is not just a weapon, it is a game changer in world history. With devastating power never seen before, this new Russian bomb challenges global security, shakes international diplomacy, and threatens the military balance among the great powers. Its environmental and humanitarian impact is terrifying, and its existence raises urgent ethical questions. In this series of in-depth analyses, we explore the secrets, strategies, and consequences of this weapon that could transform the future of the planet. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Now, let's get started. Russian bomb current geopolitics. Russia. Traditionally an influential and sometimes unpredictable actor on the global political stage, has just unveiled something that shocked the major world powers. A nuclear bomb unprecedented in its magnitude. Considered the largest and most powerful nuclear weapon in the world, this bomb, informally nicknamed by spies as the Tsar Bomb 2, is capable of wiping 3 or 4 countries off the map simultaneously, according to international intelligence estimates. The magnitude of this weapon reveals a significant shift in the global balance of power, imposing a new reality in terms of international security and military strategies. Unlike mere rhetorical threats, the practical demonstration of this bomb shows that Russia wants to prove it is ready to exert its power without hesitation, which in turn causes concern among Western nations and other powers. This revelation comes at a time of heightened tension, with the war in Ukraine still ongoing, strict economic sanctions against Russia, and growing distrust among the great powers. The display of this bomb serves as a clear warning that Russia not only resists pressure, but is arming itself to impose its dominance, potentially triggering a new global arms race. The geopolitical impact of this weapon extends beyond the military sphere. It directly affects diplomatic relations, the global economy, and collective security. Countries around the world are forced to reassess their defense strategies, alliances, and foreign policies in light of this new balance of power. Furthermore, the fact that this bomb was developed in absolute secrecy and revealed only now increases the sense of international insecurity. None of the major countries in the world knew of its existence, demonstrating a clear Russian intent to act with autonomy and strategic surprise. The demonstration of this destructive power aims to intimidate, but also to showcase Russia's technological and scientific capabilities, reinforcing its position as a military superpower. On the other hand, this new era of nuclear weapons brings enormous risks to global stability. The existence of weapons capable of destroying multiple countries simultaneously raises the possibility of a conflict with catastrophic consequences. The Western powers' response has been to intensify their own military programs, which could trigger a militarization spiral that threatens world peace. The arms race may generate new hotspots of tension, increase the risk of accidents, and make any international crisis far more dangerous. Faced with this scenario, the international community faces a huge challenge: how to guarantee global security when the most destructive weapons ever created are in the hands of a few countries. Efforts for nuclear control and disarmament seem, for now, insufficient given the complexity and secrecy surrounding the development of these weapons. The new Russian bomb makes clear that international security issues will need urgent reconsideration, with more dialogue, transparency, and agreements that take into account the new technological reality. In summary, the revelation of the Tsar Bomb 2 is a milestone in world politics, a demonstration of power that shakes the global balance and imposes a new agenda for security and international relations. The world stands at a delicate moment where peace and stability depend on the balance between strength, deterrence, and effective diplomacy. Nuclear weapons, Tsar Bomb, and Tsar 2. The history of nuclear weapons is marked by a continuous escalation in destructive power, alongside advances in science and technology. In 1961, the Soviet Union tested the Tsar Bomb, then the largest explosion in human history, with an estimated yield of 50 megatons. The force of this weapon was so intense that its shockwave circled the Earth 3 times, leaving a terrifying mark in the world's memory. More than 6 decades later, in 2025, Russia revealed a new weapon, informally called the Tsar Bomb 2, which promises to surpass by far the destructive capacity of the original Tsar Bomb, potentially reaching yields between 100 and 120 megatons, double the previous bomb. This evolution shows how the nuclear arms race has not stopped since the Cold War, and how arsenal power continues to grow at a frightening scale. To put it into perspective, the bomb dropped by the United States on Hiroshima in 1945 had a yield of 15 kilotons, meaning this new Russian bomb would be about 8,000 times more powerful than the first nuclear weapon used in and conflict. The magnitude difference is unimaginable and reveals how far humanity has advanced in destructive capability. This technological evolution is not just quantitative but also qualitative, with reports indicating that the new bomb uses a next-generation fusion material different from the traditional uranium and plutonium. This innovation allows for generating a much greater amount of heat and radiation, making the explosion far more devastating and extending effects beyond immediate destruction, impacting the environment for long periods. The development of this weapon was carried out in absolute secrecy, in a laboratory isolated deep in Siberia where not even satellite images can penetrate. Approximately 2,000 scientists took part in the project, but divided into highly specialized teams where no one knew the complete picture of the weapon they were building. This fragmentation of information and knowledge reflects the technical complexity and sensitivity of the project, as well as a strategy to maintain strict control and absolute secrecy. Beyond its overwhelming power, this new bomb has significant implications for geopolitics and international security. Its destructive capacity spans multiple countries simultaneously, changing the paradigm of nuclear deterrence and increasing the risk of catastrophe if used. The environmental impacts are also immense, with radiation and pollution that can render areas uninhabitable for decades, affecting not only the direct targets but the entire surrounding region. This advancement marks a critical point in the history of nuclear weapons while placing humanity before a moral dilemma. How far should scientific development go in pursuit of weapons capable of destroying civilization? The fact that Russia can keep this type of weapon in absolute secrecy also raises questions about the effectiveness of international nuclear non-proliferation treaties and arms control. The race for new weapons of mass destruction, rather than slowing down, seems to be gaining new momentum, with potentially dangerous consequences for world peace. In sum, the evolution of nuclear weapons from the Tsar Bomb to the Tsar Bomb 2 shows a huge technological and strategic leap, demonstrating how humanity continues to develop instruments of power that could threaten its own existence. This scenario underscores the urgency of global debates involving disarmament, control, and above all, the search for collective security paths that prevent the use of such devastating weapons. Technology behind the Tsar Bomb 2. The development of the Tsar Bomb 2 is shrouded in deep mystery, the result of a secretive and highly technological effort led by Russia. Unlike traditional nuclear weapons, this new bomb is based on next-generation fusion materials that promise unprecedented power. While conventional nuclear bombs use uranium or plutonium as fuel for the chain reaction, the Tsar Bomb 2 employs an advanced type of material that generates much greater heat and energy, amplifying its destructive effects on a terrifying scale. The bomb's manufacturing process took place in a secret laboratory deep in Siberia, an area so protected and isolated that publicly available satellite images are blurred and censored, preventing any external surveillance attempts. Approximately 2,000 scientists worked on the project, but in a segmented way, with each team focused on a specific component. While some developed the fuse, others handled the container storing the radioactive material, and a third team managed mechanisms to control radiation and prevent leaks before detonation. This division of labor ensured that no one, not even the Russian president, had a complete view of the bomb, increasing secrecy and complicating any espionage attempts. The bomb's transportation was also carried out with extreme care and secrecy, using special trains equipped to withstand the weapon's weight and sensitive conditions. No detailed information about this operation was disclosed, but it is known to have taken place in a restricted environment with strict access control to avoid information leaks and guarantee process security. This clandestine operation highlights the top priority the Russian government assigned to the project, showing it is not merely a piece of technology but a strategic power tool. Beyond the bomb's physical power, its environmental effects are a cause for grave concern. The new generation of fusion material used in the bomb produces intense heat and radiation capable of contaminating vast areas, rendering entire regions uninhabitable for years. The explosion would not only cause the immediate destruction of cities or countries, but also inflict lasting damage on the environment and public health, spreading atmospheric pollution and radiation that would affect future generations. This environmental dimension extends the bomb's impact far beyond military conflict, constituting a global threat. The technological advance reflected in the Tsar Bomb 2 demonstrates Russia's ability to combine cutting-edge science with military strategies to create a weapon that can redefine the concept of war and nuclear deterrence. However, this technological secrecy also raises numerous questions about the ethics and and consequences of developing such devastating weapons. The absolute secrecy surrounding this bomb hinders international debate and the development of effective treaties for its control and possible dismantling. The Tsar Bomb 2 is not only a symbol of military power, but also a warning about the risks of unchecked advancement in war technologies without transparency and control. While humanity pursues scientific progress in various fields to improve quality of life, the use of this knowledge to create instruments of mass destruction poses an ethical and political dilemma that the international community urgently needs to address. Implications of the Tsar Bomb 2. The revelation of the Tsar Bomb 2 raises not only military and geopolitical concerns, but also a profound environmental and humanitarian crisis. The bomb's estimated yield of 100 to 120 megatons means the explosion would cause catastrophic damage far beyond the immediate destruction caused by the initial impact. The emission of ionizing radiation and the spread of atmospheric pollutants would render entire areas uninhabitable for decades, with effects felt well beyond the territories directly affected by the blast. Radioactive contamination, soil, water, and air pollution would threaten public health, causing diseases, genetic mutations, and devastating impacts on local biodiversity. The heat generated by the explosion would not only be intense at the moment of impact, but would also trigger massive fires and widespread wildfires in nearby areas, further increasing pollution levels and local greenhouse effects. The dispersion of radioactive waste in the atmosphere could influence the global climate, exacerbating problems such as acid rain and ecosystem imbalances. The explosion could create a toxic cloud traveling thousands of kilometers, affecting distant populations and complicating damage control efforts. On the humanitarian front, the bomb's effects are equally alarming. A detonation in an urban area would cause the instant death of millions of people, with survivors facing severe injuries and radiation-related illnesses. Already overstretched medical infrastructure would be unable to cope with the number of wounded, worsening the humanitarian crisis. Moreover, environmental contamination would hinder access to potable water and food supplies, increasing risks of hunger, malnutrition, and epidemics. In the long term, radiation can cause cancer and other chronic diseases in affected populations, with effects that could persist for generations. This scenario makes the Tsar Bomb 2 a weapon not only of military destruction, but a direct threat to human survival and environmental sustainability. The existence of a weapon with such capacity challenges the ethical and legal limits of nuclear weapon use and the role of the international community in preventing their deployment. The bomb symbolizes a danger that transcends borders and demands joint efforts to avoid a global catastrophe. Protecting the environment and human life must be a priority in any discussion about weapons of mass destruction. International organizations, governments, and civil society need to intensify debates on regulation and disarmament, strengthening treaties like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and promoting transparency and strict control over these weapons. Without such global commitment, the risk that weapons like the Tsar Bomb 2 will be used remains a constant threat. In summary, the environmental and humanitarian implications of the Tsar Bomb 2 represent one of today's greatest challenges, highlighting the urgent need for dialogue, cooperation, and international responsibility to preserve life on the planet and ensure that the destructive power of this weapon is never employed. Arms race and global reaction. The revelation of the existence of the Tsar Bomb 2 caused an immediate impact on world powers and drastically changed the international security landscape. Countries such as the United States, NATO members, and the European Union began reassessing their defense strategies upon learning that Russia possesses a weapon of mass destruction capable of simultaneously annihilating several countries. This information generated a sense of urgency and apprehension, leading to a significant increase in investments in military technology and their own nuclear program. The global response was swift. Plans for arsenal modernization, development of missile defense systems, and strengthening of strategic alliances were put into action. The news of the new Russian bomb triggered a phenomenon many experts call the new arms race, comparable in scale and severity to that which occurred during the Cold War. At that time, the world lived under the constant shadow of nuclear threat, with superpowers competing to create more powerful and sophisticated weapons. Now, this cycle seems to have been reactivated. escalated. Driven by Russia's show of strength, countries with suspended or contained nuclear programs began reviewing them, while other nations that previously did not invest in this type of weaponry started seriously considering it to ensure their security. This scenario brings a series of risks to global stability. The intensification of the arms race increases the chances of errors, accidents, and misunderstandings that could trigger large-scale armed conflicts. Moreover, the rise in the number of nuclear weapons and technological proliferation complicates international control, making it harder to prevent these arms from falling into the hands of terrorist groups or unstable governments. The existence of the Tsar Bomb 2 exacerbates this problem, as it demonstrates that weapon development can be kept under absolute secrecy without effective international monitoring. Amid this new arms race, important diplomatic challenges also arise. Pressure on international bodies such as the UN and nuclear regulatory agencies increases, demanding new treaty proposals and agreements to contain the escalation. However, the climate of distrust among powers hinders dialogue and cooperation, especially when one country possesses such a massive weapon and chooses not to officially disclose its development. This impasse weakens international collective security mechanisms and opens space for tensions and confrontations. Additionally, the arms race directly influences global economic relations, as rising military expenditures affect national budgets and can cause economic imbalances in different countries. Nations with fewer resources become even more vulnerable and dependent on great powers for their defense, which widens global inequalities and creates a permanent environment of insecurity. Therefore, the international reaction to the Tsar Bomb 2 is not only military but multifaceted, involving diplomacy, economy, security, and even social aspects. The new arms race demands that the global community urgently reassess its priorities, seeking ways to contain nuclear proliferation, strengthen international agreements, and ensure that the destructive power of this weapon is never used, preserving world peace and stability. Russian strategy and the Tsar Bomb 2. The creation of the Tsar Bomb 2 represents much more than a technological advancement in Russia's nuclear arsenal. It is part of a carefully planned military strategy to guarantee Russia's position as a dominant global power, especially amid growing tensions with the West. Possessing such a powerful weapon serves not only as an instrument of war, but primarily as a tool of deterrence and political influence. Simply owning this bomb creates significant psychological pressure on adversaries, imposing clear limits on their possible actions. Russia has faced severe economic and political sanctions since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and the demonstration of military power with the Tsar Bomb 2 is a clear sign of resistance and self-sufficiency. By keeping absolute secrecy about the weapon and not officially revealing its name or capacity, the Russian government creates an atmosphere of uncertainty that strengthens its position in international negotiations and geopolitical disputes. This is part of a calculated strategy to intimidate without necessarily resorting to using the weapon, using fear as a means of control and influence. In the military field, the existence of this bomb changes the strategic calculations of Western powers, forcing them to rethink their tactics and contingency plans. The possibility of an explosion capable of destroying several countries simultaneously imposes significant restrictions on troop movements, use of certain technologies, and escalation of regional conflicts. Nuclear deterrence, already a central component of global military strategy, gains a new dimension with the Tsar Bomb 2, intensifying the balance of power and paradoxically maintaining a type of stability based on mutual fear. However, this strategy also carries high risks. The secrecy surrounding the project, while protecting against espionage, hampers dialogue and transparency that could help avoid dangerous incidents or misunderstandings. The lack of clear communication increases the danger of rash responses and unintended escalations, especially in a context of high political and military tension. Furthermore, developing this bomb in a remote region of Siberia, far from international control, raises concerns about monitoring and weapon security, since accidents or failures could have disastrous consequences. The role of the Tsar Bomb 2 in global politics goes beyond the military field. It symbolizes Russia's determination to maintain its influence in a multipolar world where new powers emerge and old rivalries persist. The weapon helps reinforce the image of a strong and invincible Russia capable of challenging Western dominance. This posture may trigger a chain reaction of rearmament and alliances, which will affect international stability in the coming decades. In conclusion, the Tsar Bomb 2 is more than a technological breakthrough or a weapon of destruction. It is a key piece in Russia's military strategy and a fundamental element in shaping today's global politics. Its existence poses challenges to world security, demands new diplomatic approaches, and forces the international community to rethink strategies to ensure that the destructive power of this weapon is never used. Tsar Bomb 2: Global Risks. The appearance of the Tsar Bomb 2 on the international stage marks a critical point for the future of global security. This weapon, promising an estimated yield between 100 and 120 megatons, represents not only a physical threat but also a challenge to the global security system built over recent decades. Global security, based on international treaties, surveillance, and cooperation among nations, now faces the urgent need to adapt to a world where weapons of mass destruction like this new bomb can be developed and kept under absolute secrecy. Traditional nuclear arms control mechanisms, such as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT) and bilateral agreements between powers, encounter difficulties in the face of the reality presented by the Tsar Bomb 2. Russia's lack of transparency regarding the weapon's development and power prevents an accurate risk assessment and complicates the establishment of effective measures to avoid nuclear escalation. This situation underscores the urgency to modernize international agreements by incorporating new monitoring technologies and creating broader, more inclusive dialogue spaces to prevent uncontrolled arsenal growth. The new bomb also highlights the fragility of global security amid new geopolitical dynamics. Today's world is marked by regional tensions, economic and political rivalries, and technological advances enabling increasingly sophisticated weaponry. The Tsar Bomb 2 symbolizes the possibility that a single country can hold mass destruction power so vast it can cause devastating impacts not only to the enemy but to the planet as a whole. This makes global security a challenge, not only military, but also environmental and humanitarian. Moreover, the existence of this weapon may influence the posture of non-nuclear countries, which may feel compelled to develop their own arsenals for protection. This could lead to even greater nuclear proliferation, with all the associated risks, including the potential for weapons falling into the wrong hands, such as terrorist groups or unstable governments. The Tsar Bomb 2 thus acts as a catalyst for possible expansion of nuclear armament, further complicating the international security scenario. The psychological impact of the bomb is equally relevant. The threat of a weapon capable of destroying multiple countries simultaneously creates an environment of fear and mistrust that can hinder cooperation and peace efforts. The fear generated by uncertainty over its use or final fate may lead to aggressive responses, increasing the likelihood of conflicts. Therefore, the future of global security will largely depend on nations' ability to find paths for dialogue, strict arms control, and building mutual trust. In summary, the Tsar Bomb 2 represents an unprecedented challenge to global security, requiring innovative and coordinated responses that transcend immediate national interests. The future of world peace is directly linked to how the international community deals with the existence of this new and powerful weapon. Influence of the Tsar Bomba 2. The revelation of the existence of the Tsar Bomba 2 directly impacts the dynamics of international diplomacy, especially concerning negotiations between world powers and the maintenance of the global order. The bomb, representing a gigantic leap in Russian nuclear capability, alters the balance of power and imposes new unwritten rules in international relations. The presence of a weapon with such a high destructive capacity creates a scenario where traditional diplomacy faces enormous challenges to prevent tensions from escalating into open conflict. In diplomacy, possession of the Tsar Bomba 2 functions as a powerful bargaining tool. Russia, by keeping this weapon secret for so long and finally revealing it, sends a clear message that it is willing to use its military power to protect its interests without relinquishing a firm stance in political negotiations. This generates pressure on other countries, which need to respond cautiously to avoid further escalating tensions. The balance between showing strength and seeking dialogue becomes delicate and essential to avoid disaster. On the other hand, the bomb can hinder important multilateral agreements, such as disarmament and nuclear arms control treaties. The uncertainty about the bomb's real power and fate makes negotiations more complex, as involved countries will distrust Russia's intentions. Trust, essential for any diplomatic progress, is shaken by the opacity surrounding the project. This can lead to cycles of retaliation and mistrust that weaken the international system, preventing the construction of a more peaceful environment. Another important point is the bomb's impact on relations between allied and adversarial countries. Nations and military blocs like NATO feel compelled to increase their own power, which can provoke a cascading effect of growing militarization. Meanwhile, neutral countries or those seeking balanced relations with both sides face a dilemma: how to position themselves in the face of such a significant threat without compromising their security or provoking hostilities. Furthermore, the bomb also influences economic diplomacy, as sanctions and blockades can be used as tools of response. Russia, aware of the weight the bomb grants it, may adopt a firmer stance in commercial and political negotiations, complicating international agreements that depend on economic cooperation. The interdependence of countries in global trade makes these negotiations even more sensitive, as a military crisis could quickly evolve into a global economic crisis. Finally, the Tsar Bomba 2 highlights the urgent need to modernize international diplomatic mechanisms, seeking transparency and dialogue methods that can reduce tensions generated by weapons of mass destruction. The diplomacy of the future must incorporate strategies that consider not only military interests, but also environmental, social, and humanitarian issues related to nuclear armament. In summary, the Tsar Bomba 2 reconfigures the world diplomacy map, imposing challenges that require creativity, prudence, and collaboration among nations to ensure that the destructive power of this weapon never becomes a factor of global destruction. Impacts of the Tsar Bomba 2. The existence of the Tsar Bomba 2 affects not only the geopolitical and military landscape, but also represents a serious threat to the environment and human survival. With an estimated yield between 100 and 120 megatons, its use would cause devastating impacts, both immediate and long-term, making the humanitarian issue one of the greatest challenges for the international community. First, the direct impact of the explosion would be catastrophic. The massive energy release would cause a shockwave capable of destroying entire cities and regions, resulting in instant mass casualties. The radiation released would contaminate vast areas, making human and animal life impossible for decades, perhaps centuries. This contamination would have irreversible effects on soil, water, and air, harming agriculture and ecosystems, as well as causing serious diseases among survivors and future generations. Moreover, the intense heat from the explosion would generate large-scale fires, further increasing environmental destruction. Smoke and particles launched into the atmosphere could reach the stratosphere, causing global climate effects such as the so-called nuclear winter, characterized by temperature drops and reduced sunlight. This would affect harvests worldwide, potentially leading to global food crises. The combination of these factors would compromise life across several continents, far beyond the directly affected area. Another crucial aspect is the psychological and social effect of the humanitarian consequences. The world population, faced with the possibility of using such a powerful weapon, lives under a constant climate of fear and insecurity. This can lead to increased social tensions, mass displacement, refugee crises, and difficulties in international cooperation for conflict resolution. The humanitarian damage transcends the physical boundaries of the explosion, affecting communities and distant countries that might receive refugees and suffer indirect impacts. Additionally, efforts to assist victims of an attack with this bomb would be extremely complex. Radioactive contamination would make access to affected areas very dangerous for rescue and humanitarian teams, limiting response capacity. Essential infrastructure such as hospitals, water supply, and energy systems would be destroyed, hindering recovery and increasing the suffering of affected populations. Finally, the existence of the Tsar Bomba 2 raises a moral and ethical question about the use of weapons of mass destruction. The capacity to cause unprecedented scale destruction imposes the urgent need for international efforts toward non-proliferation, disarmament, and the search for peaceful solutions to conflicts. The global community needs to recognize that the environmental and humanitarian impacts of these weapons are incompatible with the basic principles of humanity and international law. In short, the environmental and humanitarian impacts of the Tsar Bomba 2 are alarming and demand immediate attention from the international community. It is essential that, beyond political and military issues, these aspects be prioritized to guarantee a sustainable and safe future for the planet and future generations. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you enjoyed our content, please subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Also, check out other interesting content that is appearing on your screen right now, and I'll see you in the next video. See you next time.